welcome back to another episode of The Comeback. And with me here is, of course, Ash, and I'm Samrat. And we're still talking about the Gita, and we're on chapter 2. It is very important because it distills in some way the entirety of the Gita, which is divided. It's totally 18 chapters. It's 18 chapters in total. But chapter 2 essentially takes from almost everything that you will hear in more detail from the other chapters, but this one distills a lot of those things for a basic foundational understanding of what the Gita is about. As you have seen in the previous episodes, uh, chapter 1 is basically about the battlefield of Kurukshetra, which describes the setting of the war, the Kurukshetra war between the Kauravas and Pandavas. And of course, the protagonist here is Arjun, and he is being led by his charioteer and his good friend Krishna, who now has become his master because Arjun is in a dilemma of sorts, seeing his own family and his own friends and near and dear ones facing him in battle. And so, faced with this dilemma, Arjun has a lot of questions which we addressed in the previous episodes. I mean, they haven't been fully addressed because there's a lot more to unpack here. But of course, Arjun has made that, he has taken the first step. He has made that attempt to understand. And so today we will talk about the second chapter in a little more detail. The second chapter essentially is about self realization. And in the last episode, we touched upon those concepts that the soul itself is eternal, it's part of the universal cosmos. But we'll expand on that idea and a few more very critical verses, some of them very famous verses from the Gita. And so, Ash, why don't you sort of lead into this and talk about some of those things?
Yeah, sure. Last time, as you mentioned, we talked about chapter 2, and we were talking more about the soul. And when Arjun sees his own people at the battlefield, then he thinks all these people on both sides of the battlefield as humans, because he knows them through their names or relationship, right? As opposed to when Lord Krishna answers that, he tells that they look like humans, they have relationship with you, but then they are also a soul, and soul never dies. So just like we get rid of our old clothes and then we adopt new clothes, our soul leaves our body one day, and then the soul adopts some other body. So in Hinduism, which I don't think it is common in many other world religions, there's a concept that soul never dies. I think in some religions there is that soul doesn't die either. So essentially, what Lord Krishna is telling here, that the people that you see are making you sort of like, in this distressed situation, you have to kill them or get killed. Are they even worthy to be this much, are they worthy, anxious, and then like the anxiety that you are facing right now?
Yeah.
And Arjun is obviously in deep dilemma, but also sort of in disbelief that when Lord Krishna says that these are all souls, and he questions whether these are just soul or whether they are also humans and the relations that he has. But then Lord Krishna explains in much deeper about these concepts, and he goes into explain more of the karma side of things, which is more of what he should be doing in these kind of situations, the action part. So Krishna actually bluntly asks Arjun, like, how did he even get these kind of emotions when he is at the battlefield of righteousness? And if he doesn't fight, then unrighteousness will win. And that is when Lord Krishna introduces the concept of, karma yoga, what you should do and what the only thing that you can do in your life is that you have to do your karma, and the outcome of anything is not in your control.
Yeah.
So you shouldn't really worry much about it. But if you look that into modern context, as you and I both know and everyone knows, is we try to reverse engineer that, and we look at what we are looking to get, and then we try to justify our actions towards it rather than simply thinking that this is our job to do it, and we have to propel in that direction regardless of whether we win or lose, we get crushed or we crush someone else.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting because one of the important points you mentioned is Krishna asking Arjun, how do you, why do you see these beings or people that you see in front of you as just flesh and blood? Why don't you see them as soul? But that is because the human tendency is to associate things in three dimensions, which is in the material world. And so when Arjun sees his cousins or his elders in battle in front of him, he's seeing them in the flesh and blood, which is the material realm. It's in the material realm, or it's in the realm of the everyday. But had he seen them as just pure souls that are part of the universal sort of consciousness or cosmos, then he probably wouldn't have had those doubts. And that's what Krishna is trying to impress upon him. And to give you an analogy, as you said, that how our souls, and maybe this will come up in greater detail in the rest of the book, but just as an ocean is made up of different drops, like millions of billions of drops of water, but if you looked at a single drop in isolation, if it was to spring out when the waves come and hit the shore, that single drop or that wave has a temporary existence as a drop of water or as a wave, but it's still part of the ocean. So
Right.
it's similar to what Krishna is trying to tell Arjun, that, hey, look, what you see in front of you are your cousins or elders in this life, but they have been souls that have been traveling through time for thousands and millions of years. And so it's just in this lifetime that you see them as your own family, but in essence they are just souls. So the body that the soul inhabits is not important. What's important is that it is a soul that is responsible for its own actions. And here I want to add, before we get into the shlokas, those two very important verses, since we are talking about karma yoga, and there are other yoga that we will get to, like there's bhakti yoga, there's jnana yoga, and there's raj yoga. What exactly is yoga or yoga? That's the way a lot of it has been publicized almost everywhere in the world. It's yoga. Yeah, yoga. It's not yoga. The root word is yog, and the meaning of yog is unity, unity with the truth, unity with the supreme, with the universal, the eternal. And so essentially in the Gita there are four paths to achieving this union, this unity with the supreme. There's a path of action, which is karma yoga. There's the path of devotion, which is bhakti yoga. There's the path of knowledge, which is jnana yoga. And then there's the path of I don't know how exactly to translate Raja Yoga, but I'm guessing Raja Yoga is the more ritualistic aspect of yoga, which is through certain ritualistic actions. And I could be misinterpreting this, but about these three, I'm 100% sure. So what Krishna will, as we will see in the future chapters, he will talk about each of these. But let's focus on karma yoga for the time being, which is the path of action and achieving this unity with the supreme, achieving this union with the supreme, and the supreme is also the truth, basically, through the path of action. And Ash, why don't you tell us about those two very important shlokas or verses?
Yeah, so I have pulled this original Gita, which is in Sanskrit, and as everyone can tell,
Yeah.
I'm not a genius in this, so I'll try to I'll try to read these verses, which is very difficult for me, but I'm going to give it a shot.
Sure.
And yeah, let me just actually find this.
Yeah. It's when you're reading like the original text, interpreting it can become difficult because there's, I mean, the Gita
Yeah,
itself has so many interpretations out there floating around. So,
right.
but yeah,
Yeah,
if
in
it,
Karma 1, yeah, he says, Karmarneva vadharikaste ma phaleshu kadachana ma karma phalahetu purva tisangostakva karma, which essentially translates that you have control on what to do and what not to do. And what not to do is also doing because you are choosing not to do it. So if you in the battlefield, if you are not going to take any action, you think you're not taking any action, but by not taking an action, essentially you are going to accept the defeat and you will let the unrighteousness win. So when he says these verses, even I was sort of like, confused, to be honest. It's like when you have a choice of either taking action or not taking action, then Lord Krishna says that no, you will actually do something, and not doing something is also doing something because you will be letting someone else win. So we all are constantly doing something all the time, whether we realize or not. So what Lord Krishna, to my interpretation, what he is telling in this is just do the right thing. So he also gives some examples, and maybe I've watched in some other interpretations that, if something, for example, if you are, if let's say that there's some guy who is hungry on the street, you will either feed the guy or you will not feed the guy, but you will do something. So you will take some binary action, and that's actually in your full control, whether you will do it or you will not do it, right? So he stresses here that we constantly have this responsibility of doing things, and we should be mindful of what we are doing, and we should always focus on doing the right things.
Yeah, I'm aware of this shlok or this verse, and I have heard or read a slightly different interpretation of this, and which is you have uh, you have control over the action that you take, but you do not have control over the outcomes. So you can,
Right.
yeah. So because he talks about the word used here is phal, which is basically the fruit of the action. So you have control over what action you will take. You do not have control over what outcomes it will deliver. At the same time, because uh, this might sound a little defeatist or nihilistic, because the criticism that is often heard is, oh, if you are not supposed to be attached to the outcome, or if you're not supposed to worry or think about the outcome, then why even do something about anything? Like why take action? Why take any step?
But then that actually brings to another verse, right, where he says, "Sukha dukhe samay kritva labha labho jaya jayo tato yudash yujasva nevam papa vastamayeshi," which really means, like, if you accept the defeat and the triumph or the winning, the sad and the happiness situations as similar state of mind, or at least you perceive from similar state of mind, then it will actually not bother you that much.
Yeah, I mean yeah, that's I think that's a good corollary to the original verse, because the first verse is talking about you you are responsible for acting, but you are not entitled to the outcomes. Neither are you supposed to be attached to the outcomes, negative or positive. But at the same time, you're not also supposed to uh, let this thought not drive any inaction in you. Because the critique that often comes across is, oh, if I'm not supposed to be attached to my outcomes, the outcomes of my actions, then why must I act? Because then I'm just doing something selflessly. And that selfless or selfishness also is its own debate altogether. But let's assume that it's about just doing your performing your duty and not being attached to it. That thought itself might bewilder a lot of people, because they would say, oh, if I'm not going to get attached to the outcome that I'm trying to achieve, why must I even act? But what Krishna says here is that no, you of course will have uh, a certain favorable outcome in your mind, and that is why you're acting, or you're basically performing your duty. But don't get attached to it. But don't let this detachment also prevent you from acting, because a lot of times people say, oh, I'm detached from everything, from the outcomes, so let me also not act, because that is just so that is sort of connected to the idea of swadharma, because everybody has their own dharma. Swa is self, and so swadharma is your own dharma. So a warrior's dharma is to fight on the battlefield. If he gives up his arms saying, oh, just because these are people I know and I have grown up with, but they're on the other side and they are acting unjustly, I will not fight them, then you as a warrior are not fulfilling your dharma. You may win that war or you may lose that war. That's a separate thing. But so your only duty is to actually act. But the flip side is, if you also then develop that sense of detachment and therefore you decide not to act at all, because hey, how does it matter, because I may win or I may not win, I'm not supposed to be attached to any of those outcomes, so I might as well not act. That's what he's saying. Do not let the detachment deter you from acting. And then what you said rightly, the second verse is treat both positive and negative as simply things that take them in stride, take them as they come, and don't feel attached, because life is all about, and this is more contemporary, but life is all about like sine curves. It's like sine waves. There are ups and downs. You go up, you go down, you go down, you go up. So
This also brings to one of those transition points in this chapter, where Lord Krishna introduces the concept of, there's a word called sthira pragya, which essentially means a very stable person with a very stable mind, if I'm interpreting correctly, right? So no matter what the situation is, in the face of all adversities or happiness or triumph or injustices, doesn't matter what the situation is you always have a very stable mind. And he says that if you have a very stable mind, or if you're sthira pragya in all of these situations, then you will end up taking the best decisions, right?
I would say the concept of sthita prajna, or that very idea of sthita prajna, for a lot of our audiences that may not be able to fully grasp that term, I would compare it to stoicism in some way, because the stoic philosophers of ancient Greece and even Rome basically talk to the same concept. It is essentially sthita prajna in the Western tradition, which is basically you do not react to external circumstances. You simply act on the circumstances that are presented in front of you. If you react, then that may be counterproductive, because then you are letting the external circumstances control you, rather than you acting in the face of whatever circumstances are presented to you, which is very different. I mean, it may sound that they are the same things, that, oh, I'm reacting to something, but a reaction is not action. A reaction is basically you letting the circumstances control you, whereas acting in the face of a certain circumstance is just action. I see that, okay, uh, I'm walking in the jungle and I see a tiger and it's charging towards me. I'm not reacting to that situation. I just see that situation for what it is, with a very fair mind, without being judgmental. And I just decide to act uh, in the best way possible. But if I get worried that the tiger is charging towards me, then the worry is going to probably make me do things which might be counterproductive, because the worry of the
You're
time is
absolutely
running. Yeah, it's basically uh, you know uh, that situation is controlling me now. I'm not in
right.
charge of the situation anymore. But I think we have diverged a little bit, which
Yeah.
is
No,
yeah,
no, no. I mean, this is all really good discussion because, and I mean, chapter two. That's why in some books they say it is like the summary of Gita, and some
yeah,
chapters it is more like the Sankhya. But this is actually a lot of important things that we deal with in life, especially uh, we do act and react every day, right?
yeah,
So when Arjun is facing this situation, he is again, just like you give the example of the tiger in front of you. It's like there's a battle that brewed for some time. He tried to avoid, but then now the battle is there, and he's essentially not reacting. Now Lord Krishna is telling him to act and fight this very selfless war, because the war is not only for his honor but also to preserve righteousness, and that is a much broader responsibility, especially for a guy like Arjun, because if Arjun wouldn't fight, who is going to protect the righteousness, right? So he obviously has a lot more responsibilities. That also brings to one of the important points here, um, is the powerful you are, the successful you are, the mightier you have a lot more responsibility towards this world. And Lord Krishna is trying to make Arjun realize that you have a bigger dharma here. So you should not think of this only as your uncles or aunts, like aunts are not in the battlefield, but how they will be impacted with the battle, and also the great grandparents, ancestors, your uh, teachers, and on both sides how they will be impacted. So the stability of mind that Lord Krishna is talking about, is a very important concept here,
yeah,
because if our mind is not stable in those kind of situations, then we will run away. So in this particular case, if Arjun does not think very rationally with a very stable mind, by being sthirpragya, then the way Bhagavad Gita opened, as we know in previous chapters, is he he's looking at from like a loss and win perspective right now.
yeah,
And in this particular verse and in this chapter, Lord Krishna is telling him not to look the war from that perspective as like a win or a loss. He's thinking, he is telling Krishna to think of this as a duty for righteousness,
yeah.
and don't think of like whether he will win or lose, and cautions him that no matter how good of a fighter you are, there is always a chance that you might even lose. And still, you have to fight because this is your dharma.
Yeah. Yeah, it's that's why the Gita is a complete work of philosophy, because if you look, uh, it 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 combines all sorts of philosophical traditions that you can find
Yeah.
everywhere across the world, and in all in one place. Because I recently had this thought, and since we talked about Stoicism a little earlier,
Yeah.
that Gita is one of the biggest Stoic or books of Stoicism in the world, because it basically asks you to not be judgmental about any situation or any person, but just to
Mhm.
act, you know, in fulfillment of your own nature, your own character.
Mhm.
In that sense, I would even argue that perhaps uh, a very counterintuitive thought, but if at that meeting where Arjuna and Duryodhan were both there to get Krishna's help, had the situation been reversed and Krishna was in charge of Duryodhan's chariot, a very unlikely
Mhm.
scenario. But
Yeah.
just imagine for a moment, he would have perhaps told Duryodhan the very same thing, like, do
Mm.
what you believe is right. And for Duryodhan, that might mean something very different. So
Mm.
again, that's a counter narrative, and I don't want to go there because that's going to open a can of worms, and we don't
that,
want
that that's actually a very very good point.
to.
Except that I would argue in this case that, again, I think we talked about this last time, that the mightier bad evil people with a lot of power,
Yeah.
They do not think how their misuse of power
Yeah.
or unrighteousness actions will damage not their own legacy, but also the opponents who might be weak and who might be more vulnerable. And in the long run, that is just not the right thing to do. But as we have looked up, several examples, the 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 mightiers on evil path, they will win temporarily, but at the end of the day, they will lose. I don't think there is actually any example where the
Well,
mightiers keep on winning. They do win. They do win. They win a lot, actually. They do massive damages. But I think they, at the end of the day, some point they will lose. And
yeah,
maybe with the help of God or prophet somewhere. So yeah, I don't think Duryodhan would be asking these questions or would be thinking
that's
this
true.
deep.
That's also true because, as you said, and just to extend your point, you said that the mightier will win a lot more, but in the end they will lose because the mightier win purely on the basis of the material. They
Mhm,
win
mhm,
purely on the basis of a raw power, which is just how many soldiers they have, what kinds of weapons they have, or in some other instances, it's all resource driven. But
mhm,
the uh, the people who have principles may take much longer, but
mhm.
their win is a more core foundational sort of win because it
Yeah,
is not fought on the basis of just how much resources you have. It's a more
yeah.
foundational win.
This actually brings to a point where so people who don't know Bhagavad Gita, I think we should give a little bit, story here that how Lord Krishna ended up becoming charioteer of Lord of Arjun.
Yeah,
So Duryodhan and Arjun being part of the same, same, like a family
exactly.
tree, the Lord Krishna is actually associated with both of the families at the battlefield. So when Duryodhan went to ask Lord Krishna's help in the battle, then Lord Krishna offered Duryodhan, "Do you want to pick me? And I will promise I will not pick any weapons during the war. Or do you want to pick my army, which is called the Narayani Sena,
Yeah,
the Narayani army?" And when that question was asked to Duryodhan smiles and he's like, "Yeah, what am I going to do with this guy if he's not even going to pick up any weapon
yeah,
and he will be a charioteer? So I will just pick all his mighty army." So Duryodhan actually gets all the army. And when Lord Krishna asks exact same question to Arjun, Arjun says all he needs is Lord Krishna to show
yeah.
him the guidance during the war. So when we were talking about the mighty loses one day, it's about the mighty has a lot of resources, but they will end up losing because they are just not on the path of righteousness.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, they will be destroyed.
I would also like to add a small context here. We are kind of running out of time, but I'll just add a context to that story. Uh,
Yeah.
in that story, it goes like Krishna was sleeping, and both
Mhm.
Arjun and Duryodhan arrived at the same time, asking for help. And Arjun, who was humble, or he was always a very good friend of Krishna's, he sat near his feet. And Duryodhan, who he was full of ego, he sat near Krishna's head. So when
Mhm.
Krishna opened his eyes and he knew both of them are there to ask for help, he says, I will first offer uh, my help in whichever way to the person I see first. And because Arjun was sitting at his feet, when he opened his eyes, he saw him first. And then he saw,
Right.
okay, Duryodhan is sitting right here. And so that was Arjun's humility. And then, of course, as
Mhm.
you said, he asked him, what do you want? So he asked Arjun, do you want me or do you want the army? And Arjun obviously picked Krishna to be his advisor, his charioteer. And Duryodhan
Right.
was like, I'm happy I just got the army. But because for want of time, we have to wrap up this session. Uh,
Yeah.
this exciting journey will continue. We talked a lot today about these two very important shlokas, these verses, and uh, we will see in the future episodes. We'll go to chapters 3. Maybe we'll dedicate one more episode to chapter 2, and then we'll go to chapter 3. But chapter 2 essentially is the essence of the Gita, and
Right.
there's a lot more to uncover. So thank you so much, and see you next time.
Good night.